because the managers are getting reviewed on the same way that the employees are getting reviewed, there's a certain mutual understanding between everybody as to what does the company want from me. The company wants from me those three things. They want me to be efficient. They want me to be effective. They want me to have a culture of excellence. That's what the company wants from me. So that message is synonymous to every level within management and every layer of employee. I think it's a fantastic way of looking at it.
Izzy, thank you so much for joining me on the Let's Talk Business podcast.
Thanks for having me. Really excited.
One of the things of what I love about the podcast, and my listeners are used to me saying it, is that I interview guests, and then some of the guests introduce me to other people that I've never heard of, and then ultimately we end up interviewing those people. In this case, I think it's the first, because we had your brother on the show, which was a knockout of a conversation, and we spoke all about sales. And for our listeners that want to know, I'm referring to Izzy Friedman, that spoke about sales, and that was a phenomenal conversation. And I told him that I'm looking for expanding the topics, and he told me that my brother Izzy is a pro in HR. I said HR is a very important topic, and then we connected, and now we're here.
It's great. With my brother, I have very, very large shoes to fill. He's fantastic at what he does, so let's do this.
Sure. So actually, based on my understanding, is you started off in sales as well before you hit HR. So for our listeners, give us a little bit of your backstory.
It's great. I mean, my first job was working for a husband and wife appliance sales team. Husband and wife that sold appliances, refrigerators, washers, dryers, stuff like that. Incidentally, that's when I decided that I would never work in the same office with my wife. So the way they interacted with each other, and it was not exactly a winning recipe. That was my first job. From there, I went to work in the jewelry business, selling jewelry, and I was a traveling salesman. Traveled all around the country. Would travel from Monday to Thursday, be home for Shabbos for the weekends, and sold jewelry. And at a certain point, specifically pearl jewelry, and at a certain point I decided, hey, I could do this on my own. Why do I have to do this for somebody else? I could do this on my own. Tried my hand at my own business, and unfortunately was not very successful with that, being an entrepreneur in my own business. And that was a hard pill to swallow, but I still have that, had that sales desire, the drive, still that thrill of the kill kind of thing is always something really special to me. And then I went to work for B&H Photo, and I was hired there to sell specifically to the federal government. They had GSA contracts at the time, and I would sell to the federal government. And that also required a lot of travel. I would travel to different Army bases, meet with procurement officers, and sell to them the various offerings that the company had to sell. And then I went from there into sales management and managing a sales department and managing their, what they call the bid department, which would prepare government bids for government and education. Then I managed their inside sales team, their outside sales team, their call centers, et cetera, in the sales space, guiding, training, making sure that the team knows what they're doing and to be successful.
And how did the transition to HR happen?
It's a great question. Very good question. I get that question often, especially when you go from the transition from sales to HR. A good manager overall deals with a lot of very, very typical every single day HR issues. You're mitigating conflicts between employees. When an employee has an issue with their pay, they're coming to you, they want you to advocate on their behalf for equal and even compensation. You're training them, you're developing them, you're helping them out, you're coaching, you're engaging them. A good manager is very, very involved in a lot of things that HR is involved in. The company at the time went through a senior management change. A new CEO came on board. I got a chance to work with him together, let him see exactly how my department was running. It was a very large, diverse department of every age, race, color, creed, and every type. And he wanted to revamp the HR department and bring it all under one roof. And he asked me if I wanted to do it. And I was like, I love it. Absolutely. It didn't take me a long time to think about it. I jumped right into it, and like a fish in water, I absolutely love it.
Got it. So for our listeners, before we continue the conversation, I just wanted to make this disclaimer. We'll be speaking about HR, but obviously every business is different, and in legal and even in every state, it varies the different legalities. So take this for information purposes only. And if you need to know legal, if for legal advice, consult with a legal professional in your HR. In each scenario, it's different. So let's start speaking about HR. Now, if you spoke to a company 5 years ago, 10 years ago, 15 years ago, 20 years ago about HR, or do you have somebody dedicated for HR? the conversation was, oh, well, I'm not big enough. That's made for large companies that have an org chart and they have different responsibilities and different C-level positions to fill. One of them is HR. And a small business owner doesn't need. I think a lot has changed. A lot has changed from a legal perspective in the requirements of state by state. And a lot has changed because of the demands of employees as well. What can you share as the overall, as a company, at which point do they have to have a dedicated HR department or something to follow through?
So that's a very good question. In general, there is no one size fits all remedy and no one size fits all piece of advice. Overall, if you look at what the objective of HR is, every business owner should be looking towards those types of accomplishments. So if we can maybe delve into that at a different moment, but the concept is whatever HR is to a company, whatever they think HR should be, is what will guide when they need. A lot of things, what has changed a lot, and you mentioned the good fact that a lot of the regulations have changed, people have changed, types of work have changed. A lot of things have changed over the last 15, 20 years, as you mentioned it. At the same time, a lot more of a focus on employee engagement has become a very, very important business need. Whereas in the past, there was a lot of like, you get your paycheck, come in, punch your clock, go home. I don't really care if you're happy or not. It became a lot more evident over the last 15, 20 years how important engaged employees are. And most business leaders, CEOs, managers, or whatever, are not always focusing on that. That's something that HR department focuses on. So I can't really answer the question in terms of at what point, but any business owner should consistently be looking out. And as they grow, it becomes much more necessary. It becomes much more important.
So what would you say is the key responsibilities of an HR position or the HR department?
Fantastic. I'll tell you how I look at it. And then I would, of course, like to hear from you what you think about it. But I'll tell you how I look at it. I always say that HR has two responsibilities, two main primary responsibilities. Number one is make sure employees are happy. Well, obviously, there are many layers to that, but let's just call that as a header. Number one, make sure employees are happy. Number two, keep the company safe from a compliance purpose, from a compliance level, and help the company minimize its liability. Now, the way I look at it is that they both go hand in hand. If your employees are happy, the company will have much less risk of liability. So that's what I would say is the overall, if I had to put it on a business card or a bumper sticker, it would be keep employees happy, make sure employees are happy, and protect the company from liability. And I'd love to hear your input. Like, what do you think?
Yeah, so the role of HR, based on I said, like we're used to this, it's a very corporate jargon type of title, and you could see a lot of companies now rebrand that with different titles, but obviously it's an HR department. Why? Because once upon a time it was more for the second half that you mentioned, which more for liability perspective than keeping employees happy. That was the reasoning for that department. I think now, again, it's very important to have the liability part set out, making sure the company is compliant, but it's also for employee engagement. And that's where you can see some companies will divide the responsibility, multiple people be involved, because one is more reactive while the other is a little bit more proactive. So I've seen that, being sometimes split up in two responsibilities. But I guess I'll go back to ask you a little bit again the same question I asked you before, but a little in a different way, which is, and this will bring me back, and I think to a memory when I started our company, Peters Group. We're now, Baruch Hashem, 23 and a half years old, and I remember when I started off with my partner, we were the two partners, two people hustling every single day and working in the company. Finally, we outgrew ourselves. We need to hire our first employee. But we don't have enough work for the first employee, so we had a couple of hours of work. So twice a week, a couple of hours. Where do I turn to? I turn to a family member. And I so proudly signed that payroll check. I'm a boss. I could actually sign a payroll check. Little did I know, a couple of months later, I hired it was close to the end of the year. I hired my accountant, and my accountant says, well, these checks are payroll checks. You need to have workers' comp. I signed up for workers' comp, and then I got a fine of $16,500 from the workers' comp bar because I didn't have workers' comp from the date of the first check till that day. And to a certain extent, this is how small businesses are born. You start, you trial, error, mistakes, and unfortunately, We don't want to have those. But going back to an HR department, you see a lot of those trials and errors of, between legalities, between a 1099 and a W-2, about PTO requirements, and so much that goes into that, which today's day and age, as I mentioned, is you cannot get away without having proper structure for those things. I remember when we started, we started having the first employee, the fifth employee, the 10th employee. We had different deals with different people about the vacations and the days off and sick days and everything. We were winging it. It's a small company, you're winging it. At one point, you can't run a company that way. The exposure that you have as a company is just not worth it. So I'll go back to my question to you: is at which point is a company ready that, okay, you're a solo entrepreneur, fine. You're hiring your first employee, your second employee. At which point you say, what? You got to take HR serious. You got to create those systems and processes.
That's a very good question. And I think, putting it the way you just put it leads me to think a few interesting things. First of all, a podcast such as yours and having a discussion such as the discussion that we're having is super important, because you have an audience, and you have a very, very wide audience. And you have audience of people that are starting off in business, and you have well-seasoned professionals that have been working, have larger companies, mid-sized businesses, et cetera, who are listening to a podcast such as this. And I think in this type of a format is a very, very good opportunity to get the message across. And really, the best way is it starts day one. When a person decides to start their business the right way, when a person incorporates their business and they start doing their first payroll runs and they have to set up their taxes, whether it's a sole proprietor, whether it's a partnership, an original partnership, and the way those agreements are going, a business person, a smart business person, proactive business person who really wants to build their business on strong foundations starts thinking about this even before they hire their first employee, because even with hiring their first employee, which we didn't even touch it on the recruiting aspect of human resources, even when hiring your first employee, there are a lot of regulations in today's day and age from a compliance perspective as to what you are allowed to, how to go about hiring your first employee, what information you have to do when you publicize a job. For example, New York State has laws that you have to publicize the dollar amount, how much you're willing to pay, or the price range that you're willing to pay. If you don't know that, and you put out an ad on Indeed or somewhere else, and you don't put out the price of how much you're willing to pay for the job, from day one, before you hired your first employee, you are already putting yourself into a corner where you're opening yourself up for liability. And this is something that a lot of people don't think about, because like you said, with you and your partner, when you just started, like, okay, this was going to have 3 weeks vacation. This was not going to have 3 weeks vacation. This was going to get these holidays off. This was going to get the other holidays off. And we're going to tailor make it. This person has to leave early because I have childcare, and the other person not. So we're going to let this person leave at this time, the other somewhere else. And then fast forward, and all of a sudden you realize, wait a second, this created a huge issue. So day one is the answer. Day one, when you're sitting down to think about your business, you think about compliance. You think about, how am I going to structure this business in a healthy manner, in a manner that will make sure that I'm not going to have liability, and make sure that and again, this is purely from a compliance standpoint, because there's so many more layers to the onion of what a proper HR department or person can do, but just from a compliance perspective, day one.
Got it. So this is an important. So let's talk about the interviewing process and legalities, because I've heard that, and we have actually started doing that. Like when we publish a job opening, that you have to have that, and people don't know about it. I think it's something relatively new, correct?
Correct. I think it was put in place in November of either last year or the year before, but it's relatively new. It's within the last year or so.
Got it. What is something that, you see people make mistakes as far as what you are allowed or not allowed to do in an interviewing process?
Mistakes that people make, it's a good question, because again, obviously with experience, you get a lot more knowledge. Number one, I would say whenever it comes to any type of interview, trust your instincts. That's just from a personality level. When you meet with somebody, sometimes they have everything that's right on a piece of paper. They have the right degrees, they have the right experience, but something about their personality just ticks you in the wrong way. But you're looking the other way because you're looking at the experience. You say, okay, but it looks like this person has the right stuff. I would always say pass. Trust your instincts. There's a saying in Yiddish that a guest for a while, zeta for a mile, a guest for a while, sees for a mile. That's that ESP that people have, that instinct that people have when you meet somebody. You meet somebody for the first time, exactly, I'm going to like this person. I like this guy, or I like this person, And sometimes you're like, something's a little off. Trust your instincts. That's number one. Number two, never ask any questions that are what you would consider protected class questions. Don't ask people, look purely at their business experience. Don't ask them as little to no personal questions at all. Don't ask them if they're married. Don't ask them if they have children. Don't ask them any of those kind of details or personal questions, because anytime you ask personal questions of a person, you don't keep it business focused, you're setting yourself up for someone saying the reason why I did not get this job was because the person asked me if I was married. They asked me something that was what's considered protected class. You can go Google today, because that definitely varies state by state of what's considered protected class information or protected information. Don't ask any protected information. Keep it business and look for your instincts that are going to tell you, is this going to be a right fit? Is this going to be somebody that I could work with on a regular basis?
I'll just add to what you just said is that trusting your instinct is, it's always going to be easier not to give the person the job in the first place than trying to fire them 3 months in, regardless of how you set up the employment agreement.
Absolutely. I think that's a very good point, because also another thing that companies don't realize is how much money it costs to hire an employee. The statistics out there say between $5,000 and $15,000 to hire an employee. What does that mean? It costs between $5,000 and $15,000. We're not just talking about the HR department, the recruiters, and if you actually paid a recruiter to bring a person in, even then you have built-in, you have a built-in out that if the person doesn't last 30 days or whatever it is. Besides that, how much it costs to post the ads, besides how much it costs, the time and dedication, then you have the person actually working for you, filling a role that you're paying for that's not going to work out. So that every dollar you pay this employee is wasted money. So it costs you $5,000 and $15,000 to hire an employee. So many of the problems are mitigated in the interview process so that you don't end up falling into that trap. Like you said, it's a lot harder to fire somebody, besides the fact that it's just the process is difficult. As human beings, it's difficult. It's very hard to sit down with somebody, across the table from someone, and tell them they don't have a job anymore. And it's something I take very seriously.
Sure. And yeah, I'll tell you another thing that like I've got used to throughout the years, which is I want to speak to you about the part of the interviewing process of multiple interviews, and if they're like from an HR perspective. But a lot of people, the time they want to hire, they're desperate to find their candidates. What ends up happening is that the mindset is when they do an interview is as long as the person doesn't do anything stupid, they're probably good for the job. They're like waiting for something like, oh, other than that, I've seen the resume, everything is lining up. I took the approach that when I interview somebody, I say, look, I've built this company. It's a gated community. I've spent so much blood, sweat, and tears in my company. This person has to prove themselves that they really want to get into this gated community. Like they want to be here, not because of the paycheck. Yes, of course they're going to get a paycheck, but they have another reason. And did they make enough of a case? They're built to the culture. They're built for our core values. They're built for the environment that we're building, because otherwise you get the wrong people on the bus.
I hear you. And I think, again, you make some very, very good points. The thing I wanted to bring up also in the kind of the same realm, when I interview people, and when I haven't interviewed recently, but I've done my fair share of interviewing every level from entry level to executive positions. And I can tell you that what I do is I take the resume and I turn it upside down. I don't look at them when I'm interviewing an employee. And I ask the employee, tell me about yourself. Give me the Instagram version of who are you? What do you like? I ask them about their habits. What do you like to do? What do you enjoy doing? These are I think it's more personality questions than it is about the skill set, because everybody's going to put on their resume their best, their greatest successes. No one's going to put on their resume, hey, I tried to open my own business and I failed, right? They're going to put on their resume where they were successful, how they built and how they this and that. You're never going to get to see it. But if you're not looking at the resume, there's a reason why you brought them in, because you reviewed that resume at some point. In the interview process, I think the resume is irrelevant. I think it's a lot more. The resume is just a backdrop, gives it kind of talking points, but it's a lot more about personality, seeing if the personality clicks, which goes to what you're saying. Is this person going to be allowed into my gated community? Are they going to fit my culture? Because in the end of the day, if it's the right person that fits the right culture, you will probably try to find a way to keep them in a position, which means even if you hired them for position A and it turns out they're not fantastic at position A, you might be a lot more willing to pivot them into position B because they fit the culture. They're the right person. They have the right drive. They're engaged. So it's a lot more about that than it is about what they can put on paper, what boxes you can tick on the paper that they have X degree or X experience.
Great point. So let's speak about the interviewing process in general. Is there any legal limitations as far as amount of interviews or multiple, getting a person to do an assignment throughout the interviewing process?
So good question. I am not a legal expert. That's my disclaimer, is that I give you my experience. I don't give you my legal advice. I'm not a legal expert. However, to the best of my knowledge, there's absolutely no limit. You can call a person in 4, 5, 6 times for an interview if you want. You can give them personality tests, aptitude tests, or whatever it is that you'd like to give them. You can give them whatever test that you want. You have to see if that fits your business practice. I know people that I've met in the past that I've spoken to say, look, company wants to give me a personality test, and it really turned them off. Like, personality test. Come sit down and have a conversation with me. But then there's other companies that absolutely believe in it. They say, and I've spoken to other business leaders and business owners who say, listen, if the person's not going to go through my personality test, this is my litmus test. This is how I know who's going to fit into my culture. And if they're not willing to do it, then they obviously don't fit into my culture from the beginning.
Yeah.
So philosophically, companies have to decide what they want. But to my knowledge, I don't see any reason why you can't, other than, is it really a good business practice? Are you so indecisive that you need to call a person in for 6 interviews? And there are companies that interview chronically. They'll call a person in to meet 7 different positions. It's very, very frustrating for the candidate. So it's a lot better to have a system in place that for the position, you have the hiring manager, they're going to hire, they're ultimately going to be responsible for dealing with it. So I'm going to manage the employee, I'm going to interview the employee. You want to also have you want to have a preliminary HR interview that just does an overall, this is okay, this person's good. Now let me have them sit down with Meny and have a direct discussion with him. Then they'll have a direct discussion. Ultimately, you decide to hire them. I was always of the philosophy, and am always of the philosophy, if you're willing to hire them, go ahead and hire them. I'm going to judge you by your hire. I'm going to see, did you hire well? And you're going to have to deal with it if it turns out. But I want to give you, because, and I'm also lifting you up as a hiring manager. It's not that somebody else made a decision to put this person in my department. I made the decision to put this person.
So you're mentioning a very important point, and I think we've seen the shift now in corporate America, where once upon a time there were the HR department were the people hiring, and all of a sudden shipping out people to different departments, and now the direct report, the person running the department, got 10 new people, but they had 0. It's the first time almost they're meeting that person. We've seen now a much more integrated approach to HR, which makes a lot of sense. In our company, and this is something I've been advising small business owners a lot the last couple of years, especially if you're, let's say, solo entrepreneur, you're hiring your first employee. Like I said before, sometimes you're so desperate, you don't have experience in interviewing, you don't see the red flags, you don't see those things that, wait a minute, this doesn't smell right. So I always advise people that have another person, have a friend that has a business, just to have a good conversation with that person. And I've had once where the candidate says, I'm not comfortable going to another company to interview, like for this position. I said, well, this is my process. Like you're coming to work for the company. I'm a solo entrepreneur. I don't have experience. This guy is my coach, my consultant, my mentor, whatever it is, and he wants to meet you. But in our company, what we do, and this is something that has been working for us, is there's always a direct report. So which means the person that's going to be your direct report, your direct leader. And then there's me as the CEO. So I'll always have the direct report interview much more on the skill set of what's needed and getting a feel if they were able to work together. And then I'll have a separate interview only to see if they're a culture fit. So let's say even there's a checked off on the skill. Let's say the graphic designer, phenomenal work, and the direct report is thrilled to have them on the team because they're short with a graphic designer. I still want to make sure, do they fit the culture? So I'll have a totally separate interview. And most of the time, and I've heard that from candidates, those 2 interviews are not replicates, like totally different conversation, the tone, the questions, the conversation. Absolutely. And the best part of it, which is very important, is I make sure not to speak the direct report of how the conversation went. Because if you go into the second conversation and that person already shared the red flags or shared exactly how they feel, then you're right away going in, you don't have a free mind of interviewing the candidate. But we then share notes, and then we see if we both picked up on something, then we know we picked up on something. If we didn't, we'll discuss it. So that's something that we've seen working.
I think that's very good. I just want to comment on that.
Sure.
That's because you are a business owner and a CEO of a company that's very involved in your culture. And I think that's also a very, very good lesson for business owners. It's not just you're sitting in an office and you're running the company and you have to worry about financials and all the things that CEOs or owners have to deal with, but you're also directly involved in the culture. That is a sign of a company that has a good culture, because you're very involved in that. So I think that's unique. I think that's also a very good lesson for your listeners and people that listen to this podcast, to understand that as a business owner, the more involved you are in the direct culture will actually give you an advantage to be more involved in the growth of the company in a positive way.
Yeah, so let's speak a little bit about culture, because that's one of the reasons of having a good, solid HR, as we mentioned before. I believe happy employees make happy clients, which in result make happy shareholders. It goes in that order. So that's why working on your culture is a good financial decision. People always ask me, is it worth putting in the effort and the money and everything goes into a good culture? The short answer is absolutely. You get a good return on investment if it's done right. Now, culture is not throwing parties and having a lot of, that's perks. That's, ping pong tables and babysitting service. These are all perks. A great culture is an environment where people feel happy, people feel valued of what they bring to the table. And it's also a culture where people feel they could grow and they could enhance their skills, which leads me to a conversation. How do you see HR being part, in today's day and age? It's changed a lot in the last, I would say, 10 to 15 years, where a good candidate will ask, what's my growth potential? Where could I go? Where could I grow with your company? How does HR deal with that from your perspective? How have you dealt with your experience?
It's a great question. And I love this topic because it's a very important topic to me in the world of HR. And, I would start it off with, how does a business owner or a CEO know where they're standing with the culture? So there's a few different things. There's creating a culture. There's a vision that as an owner you have of what kind of company you want to have. And you want to have engaged employees. An engaged employee is an employee who cares about the company, who wants to do things for the company, doesn't only punch a clock, in and out, does what they have to do and walks away. That's okay. You might have people like that. That's fine. They're not what they call quiet quitting, which we won't get into that, but it's a whole separate area of people that just are barely doing their job. It's only people that do their jobs and do their basics, but they're completely disengaged. And disengaged means that they don't care about the company. They care about coming and going and getting their paycheck. And that does not make for a very good company culture. But how do you know? How do you know as a business owner, where are my employees standing? Whether I have 5 employees or 10 employees? How do I know? Well, one of the ways that you know is doing an employee survey. Now, an employee survey has to be intelligent. You have to do an employee survey not to ask the obvious question. For example, you don't ask an employee survey, are you satisfied with your compensation package? How many people are going to say, absolutely, I don't need anything else, right? You're setting yourself up for a question that's going to give you an answer. And what it's going to do is, if you get the wrong answer, it's going to divert your attention to the wrong place. So you don't ask those types of questions, but you ask questions like, as an example, do you have a good friend at work? These are the types of questions because that speaks to, does the employee feel that they have friends? Are they in a good environment? Do they like their environment? You ask them, do you feel heard by your manager? Does your manager listen to you? Does your manager give you direction? Do you understand where the company is going? Do you know what the company mission is? Things like that that are indicators as to where your employees are holding. And it's important to do a survey on a regular basis, whether you do biannual or annual, and you always ask the same questions over and over again, because
so
that's
you
how you
compare.
Correct. You can compare. Am I going up? Am I going down? Because what's going to happen is for example, you're going to find out that people don't feel that their managers listen to them, as an example. So you're going to train the managers, you're going to talk to them, you're going to bring in an expert who's going to teach the managers how to talk to people, how to make sure people are heard, and spend money on consultants, and you're going to hire a chief people's officer or whatever, blah, blah, blah. Fine. You're going to get that person. Then how are you going to know if you actually move the needle in that category, unless you ask the same question next year or the next biannual or annual survey? If you see that you move the needle, then you know that the efforts that you made as a company, investments that you made to change, were successful, and then you can move on to other topics. And you can't pick every topic. You have to go year by year, quarter by quarter, and help. So number one, first thing is you need to get a pulse. You need to understand where people are holding. Once you know where your employees are holding is when you can start to make decisions on a corporate level, as a company level, what you are going to do to help improve those areas of the culture are important.
Let me ask you, what's your opinion about anonymous surveys versus getting the full, the survey with the people responding to it?
Must be anonymous, in my opinion.
Okay.
And the reason why I think it must be anonymous is because you want honest answers. Because what's going to happen is people, if they're going to give you lip service, for lack of a better term, and not tell you the real truth, the raw, the nitty gritty, unless they feel it's anonymous. For example, the concept of a 360 review where the employee reviews their manager, which I think is an important part of the review process. There's 3 parts. There's a self-review. There is we're talking about performance reviews actually right now, but there's the concept of performance reviews also correlate with culture reviews about their managers. You want an employee to give you honest feedback about the manager. They are not going to stand up and yell from the rooftop that I think my manager is not nice, because the manager is the one who's going to, if the company set it properly, the manager is the one who's going to make the decision about their compensation, their bonus, is going to go and advocate for them. They don't want to say anything, but they have a real problem with the manager. How are they going to ever get that message across unless they are convinced that it's absolutely honest? It has to be anonymous. I mean, you say, even you as a CEO can't say, hey, it's going to be anonymous. We can tell them it's anonymous, but I want to know who said that.
On the back end.
the back end. If you do it properly, you'll
Yeah.
never know. And I'm telling you, I've been in those situations discussing with different business owners, performance reviews and employee reviews. And they're okay, fine, but I want to know who said it. You're not going to know, and you can't know. And the good platforms out there won't tell you if they assign random numbers to each request, to each response, whatever, blah, blah, blah. So long response to the short question, I believe that it has to be anonymous.
Yeah. So in our case, we don't do it yearly, but we've done it multiple times throughout the years. And I've done it two types of ways. I've done it anonymous, and I've also done it through third-party companies, which that's has a benefit. First of all, it has a benefit that a third party is collecting the data, so it's not even circulating into our database or any type of software we alone set up. Second of all, we could get, even if you do have a good culture and the responses are good, you're actually getting validation from a third party about how your culture is. And we have won 2 awards in the last couple of years about great places to work in New York and the Crane's best places to work. And because they were surveying our team, we have to provide them with contact information, and they actually survey themselves with their questions.
That's
and their
amazing.
Yeah.
Did you find a difference between the ones that you conducted and the ones that were done by a third party? Like, what would you recommend to people that are asking you about the surveys?
Great. So if you want to take action on it, like to take, I would say, micro changes in your culture, then I think it's important that you control the survey questions, and you control what type of questions you're asking, because it's really dependent on where you want to move the needle forward. So you know where you are, and you want to, versus those third party have their structure of questions. And it could be based on what's happening in the industry, or what's happening in the larger world of business versus what's specifically for your company that you need. So there's a benefit of both. But I think what you mentioned is how you frame the question, or do you love working here? So there's no option of no. Nobody wants to answer, even getting that neutral answer, and you know what the neutral answer means. Understanding how to read the data and so on
And
and so
also, if you
forth.
do it on a scale, right? So if you do it on a scale of, let's say 1 through 5, indicate, or some people do smiles, is it flat? Is it a big smile? Is it a small smile? Is it a sad face?
That's the net promoter score, because you pick and choose the neutral where they fall based on the net promoter score. I want to speak about a very important topic, which is, you touched on it before, which is the performance. And I think once upon a time it was called KPIs, key performance indicators, and it's almost like a report card, which nobody wants to go there. In our company, we call it key results areas. So just a better term. And I could share with you a little bit how we do it, but I would love to hear from you. And I think it goes hand in hand for both. One is, we spoke about the growth of our employees. We want to see them growing. So we want to know what they're doing and where they want to go. And B is, it's also taking the guesswork out of, I feel this way, they feel this way, and it becomes like more of a feeling versus, why were you hired? How does the company value what you do? And how do you living up to that? What's a simple process for a small business owner that doesn't want to complicate it on some sort of rhythm on an ongoing basis to be on the same page with their employees?
So there's a few things related to performance reviews, which I love this concept and the topic again. So far, we're touching on concepts, and everyone you bring up something, I say, oh, I love that one. When it comes to performance, so first of all, if you do, let's say you have a company, you decide you're doing biannual reviews or annual reviews, which I think most companies today still go with the annual reviews, or the annual performance reviews, or results reviews, as you would call it, or results indicators on an individual basis. Most companies still, for a while, they were going biannual, but I think in the end of the day, people go through annual. If the first time the employee is hearing about either very negative or areas of improvement or areas of success is at this performance review meeting between the manager and the employee, which is another part that we need to emphasize, that they have to be done in person, which we'll talk about in a moment. But if this is the first time that you've failed the employee and you failed the company throughout the year, employees need consistent, on the moment feedback. Now, that doesn't mean that they need to be disciplined on the moment because they made a small mistake. It doesn't mean that they need to get a gift card every time they do something good, right? But there should be a consistent, structured, consistent feedback, which means that managers should be held accountable for giving feedback to their employees. And there are various tools that a person could use today that would indicate that the manager recognized the employee, or the employee was receptive to some sort of feedback that they got. So that first key to it is there has to be ongoing, and that doesn't make a difference whether it's a small business or a larger business. And I can tell you just as an anecdotal story of that regard. I won't say which company or which one of my experiences, but at some point there was a discussion with regard to employees, perks, as you call it, making employees, having them feel happy or whatever it is. And I was speaking with a very, very senior member of the company. And the member of the company said, I don't have to show appreciation to the employees. Employees know they get their paycheck. They know they get the bonus when it comes time for bonuses. What more do you want from me? And I was trying to explain that I think that's very important for managers, for employees to hear from their managers and their seniors something good once in a while. And the person was disagreeing with me on the premise and on the concept. And I asked them a question. I said, because this person was very, very senior in the company, and I asked them, if one of the owners of the company or the owner of the company pops his head into your office and says, John, I just want to let you know you're doing a fantastic job, and I really appreciate what you're doing. Thanks, and keep up the good work. You're a big executive, right? Who cares? I promise you will go home and tell your wife when you get home. You will say, the owner came in and said that that I'm doing a great job today. So what does that mean? Do you agree with me or disagree with me that employees need some sort of recognition? So in the end, I don't know if their ego allowed them to agree with me, but the point was made.
In concept, yes.
Conceptually, the point was made. Everyone needs to hear.
Sure.
And the same thing, because you touched on this earlier, the concept of growth, everyone needs to hear where they can do something better, because a good employee wants to improve. And if I don't know what you think about the job that I'm doing, how do you expect me to get better? So you telling me, or the boss or the manager telling the employee, hey, look, this is how the project was completed. I think it could have been done in a different way. I think you could have done this better. I think we missed this. I think we missed that. Let's work on this together, because I'm seeing some areas that I'm not 100% happy. This is allowing the employee to grow, as long as it's not done in a mean way or in a derogatory way or in a belittling way. It's done in a constructive way. And the same thing it is when it comes to complimenting an employee. Just giving an attaboy, as they call it. Telling an employee, great job. Thanks. I'm so happy that you did this. Smallest things go a very long way. So feedback is a constant. Feedback is something that has to be ingrained in the culture, and it has to be systemized in order for people to get used to the concept of giving feedback in performance. Then we move on to the more formal type of review, the annual review kind of thing. So like I mentioned earlier, there has to be a few parts to the review. The performance review has to be the self-review. The employee should have the opportunity to tell you what they think about themselves. Say, hey, look, here's where the areas, and the way it should be structured, the same category you're going to review them on is what they are going to fill out their self-review. So for example, I'll give you two examples: job performance, right? Overall job performance is very generic, and it could fit into almost every single category: a manager's job performance versus an administrator's job performance, or a warehouse worker's job performance, right? Job performance is a generic term. That would be one category, for example. And the other one would be team, let's call it being a team membership, or being a team, or I forgot the term, but it's like basically like, do you feel a member of a team? Like, are you contributing to a team? Those two questions, you're asking the employee, how do you feel you did? What's your job performance? And the category is basically saying to the employee, in the descriptions that you have within your job, you can make it as specific as you want, or just as generic as you want. How do you feel you perform this past quarter, half a year, a year? You give them the opportunity to respond. And the same thing is within their team. Do you feel like you contribute to the team atmosphere? And do you think you contribute well to the team atmosphere? And everything has an ability for the employee to comment, not just grade themselves, rate themselves in a 1 to 5 or 1 to 10. We have an opportunity to write a comment. Hey, I am great at team building because I, got donuts for everybody because it was Jack's birthday and blah, blah, blah. And I think this helped foster a good thing. And we all got together. We figured out a problem together. We problem solved together as a team. So those are two very generic things that the employee gets to review themselves. I talk too much. Cut me off because I'm just saying.
No. It's great. Right.
The other part of it is then the manager reviews the employee. So what's very good about this is the direct supervisor reviewing, they're getting to see what the employee thinks about themselves before they write their own comments. And why is that important? Sometimes as managers and as leaders, believe it or not, we forget. When somebody accomplished something very good throughout the last 6, especially only doing it once a year, you forget that John did something amazing, closed a fantastic deal, or helped solve a crazy problem that, was 8 months ago in February, and now we're holding December, almost a year later, and you completely forgot about it. But John in his self-review said, I did a great job because remember, I helped save that client. And when you're seeing this side by side, when it comes to review, it's reminding you, hey, wait a second, Jack did a good job in X, Y, Z thing. Even if you complimented him, you gave him attaboys at the time, but it's a year later, you're doing the review. So it helps you side by side, number one. Number two is it helps you in how you rate the employee. So when the manager's rating, for example, job performance, the manager can write all the, John, you've done a fantastic job in X, Y, and Z as exampled in the fact that you saved blah, blah, blah client. However, there is this and this and this and this, and I think needs to be improved or whatever it is. Or if it's just doesn't need an improvement, it's a great job. So this helps the manager look at it in a very, very positive way, and it gives the employee a voice that they can actually tell you what's on their mind. And because that's a very, very important part in engaged employees, is employees feeling that they have a voice and somebody's listening to them. And it gives the manager this side by side. Very, very important is once this process is all complete and the employee is rated and whatever it is, there must be a face-to-face conversation between the manager and the employee where they review the reviews, where the manager says, hey, John, you said about yourself X, Y, and Z. Here is my comment about your performance. It cannot be that I send it to them via email. I sent it to them. I logged it in the system. I said, here, click on this link to see your review. Doesn't work that way. It has to be a face-to-face conversation.
Humanized.
Very, very important. Very important, that human interaction, that aspect. And sometimes those meetings yield a lot because the employee says, I know that that's how you feel, but how can I do better? And how can I this? Which again talks about the growth and is a conversation. And sometimes it's the one time a year that they have an in-depth conversation with their leader about their performance. Maybe they have many, many micro conversations, but the one in-depth conversation. And it becomes even more significant if your compensation system is merit-based, which they know that whatever this review is going to be is going to make the difference about what type of bonus or raise they get in the coming year or what type of conversation they can have in the coming year.
Yeah. It's amazing. And I think we see a lot of small business owners avoid having those conversations because they say, let's push it through. It's okay. Like, as long as there's not a fire or something happened or my employee coming that they want to leave or whatever it is, let's because they want to avoid they're afraid of what the outcome of such a conversation could be. But from my experience is that it's similar to like a parking ticket, that if you just throw away the parking ticket, it doesn't go away. It actually accumulates interest, which means is if there's an issue there, either in the performance or in how the employee feels, one day they're going to come to you. The problem will be way bigger versus you having the conversation proactively. I do believe in quarterly reviews and internally, and just for our listeners, because I've seen a lot of business owners struggle with coming up with, well, how could we have a good performance review? So in our company, again, if you're certain companies, it's very much tied to exactly your job. So it's very easy to know the metrics for key performance indicators, so to speak. In our case, but at least in our company, or I've seen it in other companies where they adopted the same structure, which is, as I mentioned before, we call it key results areas. And it's the 3 E's: effectiveness, efficiency, and culture of excellence. So culture of excellence is how you actually perform as far as being part of the team. And then every type of position has a very simple way of measuring their effectiveness in the job or the efficiency and how they produce the work. So let's say if you're a graphic designer, it's very easy to know if your work is effective. Clients like it or not. Like just before, like literally 5 minutes before I went on to do this recording, there was a presentation to a client, and then the whole team cheered up based on the client saying on the call, it's a 10 out of 10, like the presentation. So which means is it's effective. So they worked 3-4 weeks on a project. The client got it, and it's exactly what they're looking for. So that's effective. Now, efficiency would be the communication, or the responding, or if they said it's going to take 2 weeks and it takes 4 weeks, all kinds of anything on the how. Do they come on time? Do they leave on time? What are all these different things? And when we have these conversations, it's very easy to have a very good, healthy conversation. We could give them immediate feedback to say, on culture of excellence, you're amazing, or on effectiveness, your work is top notch. But if only that will match up with that efficiency, now all of a sudden we have a winning package, so to speak. So now you give very specific feedback for an employee, and then you could give them feedback along the way, not wait till the next performance review. You could tell them, you know what, I see you making an effort on coming on time. I see you making an effort in responding to emails on a daily immediately. Nothing goes 24 hours without responding, whatever it is. And I think what ends up happening is most people, and you could tell me, correct me if I'm wrong, which is I believe most people come to work because they want to perform well. They want to be good employees.
Absolutely.
Very tiny percentage come just to need the money. They don't want to deliver value. People want to feel fulfilled. So the better you communicate feedback for employee, the faster you communicate feedback, positive and negative, the faster you're going to see the results of what that positivity will bring better results. The momentum will, keep the momentum going. So I think it's very important. And what I see too many times, and it's unfortunate, where business owners just kick the can down the road, so to speak, and they don't want to have these conversations. And they're not realizing they're just kicking it down the road, and they're not helping, not the employee, not themselves.
Right. No, I hear you 100%. And I have a question for you
Sure.
about it. But before I ask a question on your three E's, is not engaging the employee on a regular basis or helping them along the way and telling them, I see that you've improved or whatever it is. That's what creates the apathetic employee who then only wants to punch the clock. Meaning, you said that every employee starts off
Exactly.
excited, engaged. They want to do a good job. You, as a business culture owner, manager, etc., you can set the tone to actually either continue that excitement and continue that engagement, or to turn the employee off to the point where they become an apathetic clock puncher.
Exactly.
And it's really in your hands. My question about the three E's is the three E's relevant to every position within the company? Example, I mean, giving the example of a graphic designer makes perfect sense. Is their ad effective? Was it done in an efficient manner? Those things, great.
Mm-hmm.
How does something like this, for example, relate to a secretary or someone who's an administrator who answers the phone?
Exactly. So we worked literally years, to figure out. At one point, we wanted to have different metrics for different employees. Once we had the system, it works across the board. So let's say a bookkeeper. Yeah.
Right.
Very effective if the books are up to date, reconciled bank accounts, yeah, machaya, everything. It's amazing. There could be a 10 on effectiveness. Efficiency means if a vendor is asking for an update on when they're going to get a payment, and it takes 48 hours to respond, you could be the best bookkeeper. Your QuickBooks could be to the T. On efficiency, you're not getting a 10. Culture of excellence, if somebody says, you know what, I know the payments are done on Thursday, but we have a photo shoot and we need to pay a vendor deposit on a Tuesday. Could you accommodate? Say, yes, of course. Let me figure it out. Yeah. Which means you're part of the culture,
Right.
and you're there to support each other. So we found this way to work across every single position. Now, there are positions that it's much more mathematical than a feeling. But at the end of the day, the feeling is pretty close to the reality.
Right.
Because so when we give feedback on those 3 E's, never did I have where an employee would say, "You're totally wrong." They might say, "I'm not a 6, I'm a 7," or
Right.
So we also don't make this into like the scoring system is not the main part. The main part is this bucket needs improvement. The
Right.
bucket of efficiency needs improvement. Now, sometimes I will say, you're a 7 or 8, just to illustrate a point, how, like in the bigger picture, how I would see you as feedback, but not necessarily because it's a report card that we're putting down a 7. Now, in our system, and just for the record, we'll put something there because, like I said before, we want to see the improvement. So I want to be able to say, you know what, last time we were a 6, you made a huge improvement. And like, not only that, let's say I had a single employee that runs a lot of emails back and forth, and they need also a lot of quiet time. Like when they need to focus, they need focus time. So they had an issue, but from one hand, people are waiting for responses. So I told that employee, I want to work with you to help you figure this out. I'm not saying that you don't have a valid reason why we're not at a 10, but let's help you. And we figure it out. Okay, let's differentiate emails coming in from internal versus external. Okay, and so let's say internal was more important because some of the internal people needed their support to finish off on something. So we said, okay, start flat. With Gmail, you could have a filter which comes up with a label. So all of a sudden, there's like for a month or two, those emails had a label. So this employee was able to skim through quickly their inbox and know, okay, these few things I must respond before I leave the day. I'm not going to get to all my emails. So this is another point: is it's one thing giving feedback. As a leader, our job is also to help support them in improving on the feedback you gave them. It's not something, okay, this is the feedback, go find on YouTube some sort of solution to your problem. Because that's how we uplift we lift up our employees, and we really make them grow. And I think that it's something that I could say, being a business, we had throughout the years, we had a lot of employees, hundreds of employees throughout the years. And there's a line that I've learned very early on, which I use by every time I interview someone, every time I shake hands, it's the last day of their job. It is, the line goes as follows. It's going to come a time, either you're going to outgrow the company or the company will outgrow you. Our job is, while you're here, you should bring value to the company and the company should be valuable for you. And it's so true, because there is going to come a time that person moves on. They want to open their own company. They want to move on to a family business. They decided they're getting another job, more money, whatever it is.
Correct. The job of CEO is taken already.
Yeah. So your job as a leader is not to have them stick here and stay here for the rest of their life. But while they're here, they have open communication, they have feedback, they have, everything to grow. So that's just my take on it.
So I really like that. And I really like the fact that, when you mentioned that these 3 E's are basically, it fits into every position within the company. And I like that because I think that, as you mentioned, a lot of companies overcomplicate it. And they want to have one sort of review for an accountant, one sort of review for a salesperson, one sort of review for a manager, and one sort of review for a senior executive. When really, if you fit it into something like this, which is kind of something that I mentioned earlier, when you talk about job performance, it's kind of generic, but it's something that goes across to everybody. So I think it's a very, very efficient way, and it's clear. And this way, also, what happens is, because the managers are getting reviewed on the same way that the employees are getting reviewed, there's a certain mutual understanding between everybody as to what does the company want from me. The company wants from me those 3 things. They want me to be efficient. They want me to be effective. They want me to have a culture of excellence. That's what the company wants from me. So that message is synonymous to every level within management and every layer of employee. I think it's a fantastic way of looking at it.
I'll just add one more point to this, which is, we sometimes, as entrepreneurs, as business owners, we have a certain vision. We know where we want to go with the company, and we're sometimes very macro as far as where we want to go and have this vision. Guess what? You're not going to get there alone. Even if you're going to get there alone, it's going to take you a very long time. If you want to get there faster, you're going to surround yourself with great people. Now, when you're going to surround yourself with great people, most of the time, most of those people are not visionaries. Those are people that are actually technicians and people that are actually on the ground doing the work for you. They don't need to run the vision for you. They need to execute the vision. So the clearer you are with how efficiency looks, how effective, how these things look in reality, they could check off and say, you know what, I'm ready for the ride. I want to do this. So what ends up happening is, the clearer you are with your team, the better results you'll get from those people. And the more vaguer you are, and you think, let me bring them into my vision, and we're going to dream together, and we're going to get there together. Guess what? They don't know what that means tomorrow, Monday morning. What do I need to do Monday morning for that vision? I don't know. Tell me what I need to do today and tomorrow, and I'll do it 100% perfect.
I think that's a very, very good point you're making. And the reason is because I remember years ago when I mentioned before that I did a little stint on trying my own business at some point. And I had a conversation with a very good friend of mine. And he mentioned to me this concept that I never heard before, which is a concept of an entrepreneur brain. That some people have this entrepreneur brain. Some people have this great visionary type of brain. And not everybody has that brain. And not everybody has that capability. Some people are very, very good employees. They're told what to do, and they do it very, very well. And I think it's very good to recognize that. But I think another important thing that you touched on over there was the concept of understanding that it takes great people. I saw a video recently, and it was like a comedy kind of video where a boss or the CEO or an executive was basically looking around his office saying, well, what do all these people do? What does this person do? What does that person do? Do I need a guy to do this? Do this myself? I need a guy over to pay a salary to do this. Doesn't make any sense. So he kicks that guy out, and he sits there by the guy's desk doing the computer. I don't know if you saw this video or not. Isn't it funny? Like it was a comedy type of video. Before you know it, the office is completely empty. And this guy cannot figure out head from toe, what is he going to do? How's he going to get the data? What is he going to do? So when he thought he could do everything. So one thing is important, and I think it's very important for business owners to understand and value the employees and know that I need people, like you mentioned, to execute my vision. And I need to value the people that execute my vision. And understanding that I can't do it all myself is very valuable for business owners to know. And it goes directly to HR, to sales, HR, business, everything all around. When you recognize and realize that I need good people around me, people say all the time, whether it's the president, whether it's a king, whether it's a business leader, whoever it is, you're only as good as the people you surround yourself with. The president of a country is not the minister of defense, is not the minister of finance, is not the whatever it is. They are the leader and ultimately have a decision to make of who they choose for those positions. But ultimately, they're only as good as the people they surround themselves in. At the same time, I also want to jump from this into something else, which is, I thought of this while we were talking about it. I'm not sure if it's fully correlated, but we can discuss that. Letting people go. I think this is a very, very big topic that a lot of businesses get stuck on a lot of times. When it comes time for a business to part ways with somebody, or when somebody comes to you and says, if I don't get X, Y, and Z, I'm going to leave. I have a job offer and they're going to pay me $50,000 more. And if you give it to me, I'll stay. If you don't give it to me, I'll go. And a lot of businesses struggle with this back and forth and have major discussions. Should we offer it? Should we not offer it? What's going to happen if the person leaves? How am I going to do it? I'm going to be stuck. There's no way I could do it. I need this guy. I need this girl. I need this employee. There's no way that I could live without it. Or the same thing when it comes time to letting a person go. They made some mistakes. They're not a good culture fit. It's obvious that time has run out. They've outgrown the company, or the company's outgrown them, as using your words, or whatever it is. People struggle with this a lot. And I think it's very important for business owners to always realize, and this is the frame of mind that I tell business leaders within the company when they come to me and say, it's either time for somebody to move on, or I need to get rid of somebody, or the person's coming to me and threatening they're going to leave if I don't give them more money or give them some better condition or whatever it is. My response to them always is, what would you, if the person walked into your office today and said they won the lottery and they're not coming to work ever again? That's it. They're done. They won the lottery. $1 billion today, because $1 million is nothing, right? Billions of dollars in the lottery, and they're not coming to work. What would happen with your business tomorrow? Is it going to collapse? It won't collapse.
Wow.
You'll figure it out. You will figure it out. And the same thing is, no employee can hold a gun to a business owner's head. Whether it's, pay me $50,000. If not, I'm going to leave. If you felt this person was valuable by $50,000 more, and if you're a good business owner, you would be paying them the $50,000. If not, you have to wish them good luck. I'm very, very not in favor of negotiating with people when they come to you with that they have a better offer somewhere else. It's a very, very bad business practice, in my personal opinion. You never negotiate. You wish them luck. You figure it out. You're the entrepreneur brain. You have that big brain. And the same thing goes when it comes time to let a person go. Everyone, unfortunately, and this is not in a negative way, but everyone is expendable in a certain sense. Not in a bad way. It doesn't mean that you're worthless. You're very, very valuable, and you're very valuable to a company. But from the company standpoint, you have to be able to look at, now one individual is going to hold your company hostage, whether they deserve to go or they're putting a gun to your head. I don't know how we got into this, but this crossed my mind as we were talking.
It's an important point. I'll just add to what you just said, because it's so important, is that some companies have to go through the exercise of knowing that if they could go through all their employees, if there's any employee that's really holding hostage a company, should that person be replaced? Meaning to say, understanding that the risk that you have as a company, if you have a certain position that's being held hostage by a single person, because now you're on the mercy of that person coming with a gun to your hand, so to speak. I need this, otherwise I'm leaving. And now you don't have another choice. Which leads me to something that I've been teaching in our Leaders Forum, which is literally you have to fire all your people mentally every year, which means go through this process that if I have to rehire this person, would I rehire like a year later? Some people get so used to an employee that position that seat is taken. But ask yourself, when you go through your company, would you rehire this person based on what you know now? Or is that person just sitting there because it's easier for you than to replace that person? And what I mean is not to fire all these people, is actually have these conversations with those people to see how they can improve to be that, a player, so to speak.
I think that's a great exercise. I think it's a very, very good exercise. And again, being that you mentioned so many times, how is this advice good for small businesses, medium-sized businesses, or large businesses? I think this is something that's relevant to every single company.
Exactly.
But it also leads to another topic, which is the concept of succession planning. Succession planning basically means that the way I look at it is that within every position, there has to be a consistent grooming of who's going to take this position at some point, whether this person wins the lottery, whether they retire, whether they find the better offer, whatever it is. Which goes to what you were saying before. There's not one person that holds the keys. There's not one person that knows a combination to the safe. And if that person leaves, I can't get into the safe. Exactly. Someone else, there has to be a backup. Now, sometimes the backup is not ready to do it today. Sometimes the backup is being groomed. Sometimes the backup is learning as it goes along. But as a business owner and a leader, you have to have your vision out there, picking up on the individual and say, that person has a certain talent or a certain capability that I've noticed in my interactions, or that I've noticed in the employee reviews, or that I've noticed in the engagement surveys, or whatever it is that I've noticed from this employee, certain telltale signs that this person has leadership qualities in a specific area where, should the need be, they can be groomed to move into that position and take that place of. And I think succession planning is, people think it's a very big word and it's only meant for the, for Citibank and for the large companies of the world.
Exactly.
For every single company, it's super, super important to have that vision, because also what it does is it forces a business owner and a leader to be very, very in touch with the capabilities of their employees, even the more junior ones.
Exactly. This has been a blast, and we didn't, obviously we're going off timing over here. How can people find out more about you?
Well, there's, it's interesting. I'm not selling anything. I'm not
Correct.
promoting anything, but at the
Yes.
same time, I'm always willing to help with anything that I could possibly do. I'm age myself by giving my email address. My email address is ifriedmancorp@aol.com, which is AOL. Like, who uses AOL, right? Everybody said, I don't know if there's like a TikTok handle or something. That's the new generation, but it's ifriedman, like Izzy Friedman, ifriedman corp, CORP @aol.com. That's my email address that people can get a hold of me. I'm on LinkedIn as well, Izzy Friedman. You can send me a message there. And, anything, if I could possibly be of help to anybody. And I agree with you. I don't think we scratch the surface, but there's so much more to talk about when it comes to HR. There's layers and layers upon layers, but I thoroughly enjoyed the conversation with you today. And I hope people learn from it.
Absolutely. For the links, resources mentioned in this episode, check out the show notes at www.ptexgroup.com/podcast. Let's close with the 4 rapid fire questions. Are you ready?
Ooh, okay.
Number
I
one.
told myself I was going to be prepared, but okay, go ahead.
A book that changed your life?
Who moved my cheese?
Number 2. A piece of advice you got that you never forget?
Maybe it was what I mentioned earlier about the entrepreneurial brain, about understanding where I am and what type of person I am.
Number 3. Anything you wish you could go back and do differently?
Very good question. Anything I wish I could go back and do differently? Yeah, probably when I had my own business, I would have done things a lot differently.
Last and final question. What's still on your bucket list to achieve?
Well, this was scheduled before, and I was going to say that I want to run the half marathon, but I've since done that. I ran the half marathon in Miami recently. So on a personal level, that bucket list is checked off. I'm going to say it in a very personal way. I'd love to go skydiving.
Nice.
This might not be the best thing for business, but that's on my bucket list.
On your bucket list. Izzy, thank you so much for joining us. I know your time is valuable. That is why, in the name of our listeners, we'll forever be grateful for sharing some of your time with us today. It's been a blast.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate it. Thank you.
My pleasure.